with the loss of a loved one is already overwhelming, but when their belongings have piled up during their lifetime, it can feel like an insurmountable weight is on your shoulders now that you're on your own. The emotional connection we have with those belongings can be a difficult thing to navigate. They're sentimental objects, and it's hard to let them go because they hold memories, especially when it feels like we're going to be losing them all over again. But it doesn't always have to be this way. When I think about the common struggle people face when dealing with their deceased loved one's possessions, I'm reminded of the overwhelming emotions that come with it. It's like being hit with a wave of grief all over again, and the older your loved one was, the more items they will have to deal with. You're not just dealing with the physical items, you're dealing with the memories, the emotions, and the sense of loss that comes with each and every object. But in order to start your recovery, it has to start with your physical space. How can you start to recover from your grief if every room is full with the paraphernalia of that person's life? Each and every physical item is like an anchor, keeping you in the same position with your grief. And that's not good. Remember, those items are just items that were perhaps on the shelf in a shop in a previous decade. It was made in a workshop or a factory and hasn't acquired some sort of magical essence of that person. It's just an item that was owned by your loved one. In order to make the decision on each and every item, pick it up, hold it, and feel its shape. Smell it. And when you realize that you can hold it and it doesn't have the scent of your husband, or in my case, my child, you will realize it's just an item, it's just an object. If you still feel that you need a physical reminder to reference your memory, take a photograph. That way you still have the item to view if need be. In 1979, my baby son was 10 weeks old. It was the 5th of March, 1979. And I walked into his room and found him dead in his cot. He was wearing a little blue baby grow, and he was sleeping in a papoose. And I looked at him. In those days, we put them on their tummies. That was the thing. That's what the midwives told you to do, and that's what all the mummies were doing, putting them on their tummies. And he had moved in the cot a little bit, and his face was up. So his face wasn't down on the mattress. And he had lilac eyelids and a little lilac spot in the middle of his forehead, and I'll never forget that. It just looked very odd, but he was deathly white. thought, if I didn't know better, I'd think you were dead. So I moved his blanket. I shoved him. I shoved him in the back, thinking that'll make you cry. But I think I already knew that he had died. And so I picked him up and I lay him on the back, on his back, and I blew into his mouth. I held his nose and I blew into his mouth. Oh, no, that was the second time. The first time I just blew into his mouth and it all came out of his nose. So by this time I was panicking and I held his nose and I blew into his mouth and I just kept on blowing into his mouth and nothing happened, and also he was cold. And at that point, after a few minutes, I stopped and I cried out. And my neighbour from downstairs, I was living in a flat at the time, my husband then had already gone to work. It was 8 a.m. and she heard me. She said it was like a whale, some dreadful noise. So she came upstairs. We didn't have a telephone. Not many people had telephones in those days. And she phoned for the ambulance. The ambulance man came, and I had two little girls, my two little daughters with me, and they took Christopher and they contacted my husband. And he went to the hospital. I stayed at home with the children. He was dead. It was a cot death. But over the next weeks, when my husband came home from the hospital, he brought Christopher's clothes with him. And I put them into a plastic bag. And I put them in the airing cupboard. I sealed the plastic bag and I put them in the airing cupboard. And for days and weeks after Christopher died, every so often I would go to the airing cupboard and I would take these items out and I would hold them to my face and breathe them in. I could still smell his scent on those items, that the baby girl, little boo baby girl, and the bag. And then one day I went to the airing cupboard and I took the items out and I held them to my face. There was nothing there. No scent, nothing. It was like he had gone all over again. Just gone. No trace of him at all. And then they were just things. They didn't hold anything of him. I had by that time given all his clothes away, apart from these two items. So I washed them and I gave them away because he was no longer there. So what I'm saying is holding on to things holds you in the same place with your grief. And it's only by letting things go do you start to not move on. Because moving on for me feels like you've moved on and left them behind. Well, you don't. You don't leave someone behind. They're always there. But you don't need all of that stuff around you because that's oppressive. And had I have kept it, I feel it would have become some kind of shrine. And the longer I would have kept it, the harder it would be to get rid of. Because you feel like you're abandoning it. You're abandoning that person, but you're not. It's just stuff. That's why I feel it's important to take pictures and to let go so you're not anchored to that spot in your grief. And you don't replace it and make it a shrine to your grief, because that can't be healthy either. I've never forgotten him. So you can start growing in a new direction as a person. It's natural to feel attachment to these items, especially when they remind us of special moments with that person. But the truth is, holding on to everything can be suffocating. It's like living in a world that's frozen in time, and it prevents us from moving forward and healing. One of the hardest things is figuring out what to do with all these possessions. Do we keep everything or do we start to let go? The decision can be paralyzing, especially when it feels like we're making a choice between holding on to our loved ones or moving on without them. Managing clutter after the loss of a loved one requires a gentle and compassionate approach. One strategy is to take one room at a time, focusing on small areas rather than the entire house. This helps us make the task feel less daunting and more manageable. Another approach is to set timelines for yourself. Decide how much time you want to dedicate to sorting through belongings each day or week and stick to it. Remember, it's not forever. This helps create a sense of structure and control, which can be helpful when everything feels overwhelming. Involve your friends and your family members for support. Having someone to talk to, someone who can help you sort through belongings, can make all the difference in the world. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to accept it when it's offered. Even if you do want to be alone. The emotional relief that follows clearing out clutter can be incredible. It's like a weight has been lifted off your shoulders and you can finally breathe again. Remember, it's all right for you to take time when you're dealing with clutter after the loss of a loved one. It's a process and it's not something that needs to be rushed. Take your time and be gentle with yourself. And remember that it's okay to ask for help when you need it. If you're watching this video, I would love to hear from you. Have you struggled with clutter after the loss of someone you love? What strategies did you have to work with? Or what challenges have you faced? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Bye bye.